So my name is Steve Buck Owens, and I'm a retired Army aviator pilot. I retired with 35 years, 7 months, a combination of active duty, National Guard, and reserves. I did 3 deployments to Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Africa. And I want to say, before I get choked up at all, I want to thank my wife, because while I was gone for 2.5 years deployed all over the world, she took care of the kids. See, I didn't even make it through the first one. All right. But here's why I'm here tonight. I want to introduce you to this young fellow right here. This guy's name is Zach Dickinson. Zachary Thomas Dickinson was born in Kaiserslautern, Germany on July 26, 1985. He joined the West Virginia Army National Guard at the age of 17 to be an avionics technician. He started U.S. Army Warrant Officer Rotary Wing Aviator course at 19, just like I did, and he became a Black Hawk pilot in 2005 at the age of 20. I had just returned from a deployment to Kosovo as a medevac Black Hawk pilot, and then I switched into the airplane unit, which was the C-12, Super King Air 200. I heard great things about Zach. He was just a young kid. I was an old guy. But I saw this kid walk around. He looked like he was about 13 years old, and I'm like, how in the world can he fly a Black Hawk? But I kept hearing good things. While I was in my unit, as things go, they decided to change the commander. They made me the commander of the unit, and they said, congratulations, you're going to Afghanistan. This was in 2009. I'll say this for the young people in the crowd. When I hired people for the airplane unit, in my whole career, I hired people based upon somebody I could sit in the cockpit with for 4 hours and not want to choke to death. I thought there'd be more of a chuckle. But more so than skills, because I can teach you the skills. I want somebody that's a good team player. And Zach had that kind of reputation. I'll take good attitude over skill any day of the week. So while I was the commander of this small detachment as a Chief Warrant Officer 5 was my final rank, but I had 6 pilots and 2 NCOs. I was tasked with filling the unit to get ready to go to Afghanistan to fly bigger airplanes with bigger engines to do a reconnaissance mission. And they had an operator in the back that did the voodoo that he did in the back. So Zach was flying the HH-60 Lima Black Hawk medevac helicopter. And he was suggested to me as somebody that I could take who was young, could drink through a fire hose to get the information, and more importantly, had a great attitude. We immediately sent him off to the 3-month fixed wing course at Flight Safety International at Fort Novosel, which is, then it was Fort Rucker, Alabama. Zach was young compared to the rest of our unit. A lot of the unit was old guys like me and my standardization pilot. I never once witnessed him say he couldn't do something, ever. He was talented. He was talented with a computer, just as he was talented in flying the airplane. When we got to Afghanistan, he was sent to a unit at Kandahar. I was at Bagram. There were 2 different locations, and he flew out of there to great rave reviews from everybody that he flew with. He was a very gifted airplane pilot. While I was deployed, I got to know Zach and a little bit about his family. His mother had remarried, and each time I asked him about his mom and his stepfather, he would give me these kind of real cagey answers, like, well, they just moved and bought this acreage in Michigan. And I'm like, oh, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to open up a business. And then I talked to him a month later, and, well, now they just moved to New Jersey. I'm like, are you sure they're not in the witness protection program? You know, something's going on here. So I got to know that he was just such a great human being. He took very good care to be nice to my children who were young at the time, and they looked up to him. When we returned from Afghanistan, he and I were on the same flight coming back from Atlanta. And I said to him, who's picking you up at the airport? And he goes, nobody. And I said, no, we can't do that. So my wife and kids said, we'll pick you up, you come with us, and then we'll take you back and either meet your parents or we'll take you home or whatever. We ended up meeting his parents at a McDonald's at like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, which did nothing to dispel the witness protection rumor, because it was just weird, because it was, just an odd situation. Zach stayed in our unit and he began to build experience. We flew missions all over the country to include Cuba and the rest of the Caribbean. Zach was a better pilot than I will ever hope to be. In 2013, our unit was tasked to deploy to Africa, where we'll be flying 2 airplanes all over the northeastern portion from our base in Djibouti. Once again, we had to train pilots to be full strength, and we were depending on Zach to season them. It goes without saying that an airplane is way different than a helicopter. They don't hover well. I hired a new old guy to fly the airplane, who was a good helicopter pilot. Unfortunately, he had breath that could melt steel, and he was a terrible airplane pilot to boot. Let that image fester in your mind for a minute. As a commander, I pulled RHIP on Zach. Rank has its privileges. I told Zach, you're going to fly with this guy since you're going to be an instructor pilot and needed the practice. Also, I realized that my skills as an airplane pilot were not even close to Zach's, and this guy would probably kill me. While we were in Africa, we flew to a spooky base called Spooky. A lot of operators down there at Manda Bay, Kenya, a couple times a week. We flew people, weapons, SEAL stuff, SEAL as in the Navy SEALs, and supplies and mail. The base was near the Indian Ocean and only had a 3,000-foot runway. We were normally prohibited from landing anywhere shorter than 5,000 feet, so for us Army guys, it felt like a carrier. The runway was also covered with baboons on a daily basis, and we had to fly low over them to scare the baboons and then return quickly to land before they wandered back out again. As such, it was a high-risk mission in aviation terms, which required me to go to my boss, who was a full colonel, to receive written permission to do the landing in and the takeoff out, period. And that was signed off by a commander of the Air Force unit we were attached to. It was our practice at our unit to greet every returning aircraft. So no matter what time of the day or night, we would all go out to help out. We would help put the plane to bed, and the pilots typically had a 10-flight-hour day. Zach, an old cigar breath, returned one day. Zach was excitedly telling me about his day. And Zach was always a little nervous around me. I'll give you another picture of Zach. Zach always talked really fast when he got around me, and he said, Steve, you kind of intimidate me a little bit, even though I treated him really good. He said, as he's telling me about the flight, he said, hey, I let Don do traffic patterns. And he saw my face. I said, what? He had decided upon himself, because he bent the rules occasionally, he decided to take this guy on this 3,000-foot baboon-covered runway and fly traffic patterns. That wasn't a good idea. So I was sitting with my standardization instructor pilot, and I launched into what was later described from him as the best ass chewing he'd ever seen. At the end, I told Zach I would send him home. Sorry. And it better never happen again. All he said was, yes, sir. Zach was resourceful and not afraid to push the rules. And sometimes I let him. We would fly to Entebbe, Uganda. Somebody hit me if the time goes, Tom. We would fly to Entebbe, Uganda, and we would walk into the airport, and every time we tried to come back out through the security, they gave us a hard time because we had switchblades, we were in civilian clothes, they were trying to take all our liquid. Zach came up to me and he goes, Steve, I think I've got a solution. I just need a picture of everybody. Okay, Zach, you got it. So he went and took everybody's picture, and the next thing we knew, we were issued these very fancy-looking ID badges with our picture that said DOD Aircrew, access unrestricted, with a barcode. And it had dates on it and restrictions and all kinds of stuff on it that was complete BS. So the first time we go to the airport, I go with one of Zach's friends. I'm gonna put another picture of Zach up here. We go to the airport, and I told the guy I was with, he was a little nervous, and I said, look, walk into this place like you own it. And we walked in the door to the airport, and there was a guy standing there with an AK-47, and he just glared at us. And I stepped forward, and I went, and I showed him my little badge, and he went. And we went through the airport. Now, I'm not saying this is what you should do at every international airport you go to, but at Entebbe, Uganda in 2013, it worked. And it was all because of Zach. Eventually, we got back home, and Zach got selected for an Army mission that involved flying a Cessna Caravan for Special Forces. He was sent to a bush pilot course and was more than ready to deploy again. The mission got scrubbed. Eventually, he got a job instructing at the Army Aviation Fixed Wing Training Site in Clarksburg, and he became an instrument instructor. and was well loved by those who worked with him and had the call sign Mystic 54. At the same time, he began dating an old girlfriend, and it became serious, followed by marriage. He and his wife had a son named Zane. Zach was a very devoted father. His childhood was not what he related as being a normal one. Go back to the witness protection thing. And he made extra efforts to be a good dad. After he moved to the training site and I to our next job, I didn't have regular contact. There was a 20-year age gap, and we were both busy. Zach left the training site full-time and took a job with American Airlines as a 737 first officer. One day in early 2020, I received a phone call from him out of the blue. Hadn't talked to him for a couple years. He told me he was sitting in a hotel in Salt Lake City and he wanted to reach out to apologize to me. Confused, I asked why. He said that when he flew in my unit in Afghanistan and Africa, he was a stupid young kid who made stupid decisions, and each time I took care of him and was kind to him. I told him that was my job as the commander and more so as his friend. I felt good that he took time to tell me that, and he ended the call saying he was a 737 first officer for American and he owed it to me. On May 26, 2020, I got contacted by my flight surgeon late one afternoon who stated that Zach was missing. He said Zach sent him a video suicide note by message and gave directions on where to find his body. At that time, Zach lived in Pennsylvania and had stated that he would be found in a park off a hiking trail. The local authorities found his car in the park, but had not yet found his body. Early the next morning, my former operations NCO and I went there to help search. I was shown the video suicide note, which was nothing short of awful. And he stated that he was somehow a disappointment to his family. At this point, I had also been a West Virginia State Trooper for 10 years and had dealt with suicide on both sides of the badge. We noted that it was on a bit of a ridge and tried to match that terrain up. I'm going to finish, I swear. And we went out to search, and thankfully my flight surgeon found his body. He was leaned up against a tree with a single gunshot wound to the head. Did I think about the phone call you made to me earlier that year? You bet. Did I lay in the dark at night and think maybe I should have dug a little deeper into how he was doing? You bet. Did I think that maybe I stayed in better contact with him and I could have kept him from doing this? You bet. However, it was discovered that he had left a suicide note for both his son and wife, which I do not know the contents of. I also found out that he'd flown with his best friend 2 days prior to killing himself. I spoke with his friend at his funeral, and he told me Zach was his normal happy-go-lucky self that day. There was, of course, no drugs or alcohol involved, so many of us were left wondering to this day, which I know from experience is troubling to those left behind. Zach died on May 26, 2020 at 34 years of age. I tell this story in Zach's honor and share it with a bit of a cautionary tale. You can only do what you can do for people. Sometimes you will never know the reasons. Sometimes you will do your best and still be shut out. I tell anyone that knew Zach, I plan on kicking his butt when I see him again. I think I left the page off, but I wanted to end this with a quote from the most famous author that I know. It's a guy by the name of, maybe you all have heard of him, Mr. Tom Baker. In every war, every conflict, there's a cost that sometimes can't be seen. There are wounds that occur and may lie in your soul festering for years before the demons bring them out of their hiding place. So I ask that soldiers don't get sent into the breach until all diplomacy has been exhausted, and that when we return, you understand that we may have changed, that there may be wounds you cannot see. I may never have been the warrior that I wanted to be, but I did have the distinct honor and privilege of knowing and fighting alongside many true warriors. And Zach Dickinson was one of them. And right there, that's a picture of him after he hit a bird in the airplane and splattered the bird the whole way down the side of the airplane. And that was kind of Zach's look at me. He would go, "What, Steve? Come on, this is what I do." Zach Dickinson was a wonderful man. Thank you for listening.